Oh, I think I've been unmuted the entire time. Could y'all hear me talking the entire time? Oh, good, okay. It's like my greatest fear, actually, that my mic would stay unmuted and then I would go to the restroom, or I would say something to Mary Catherine that I didn't want the rest of the world to hear.
I had a pastor do that once.
I've seen videos, yeah. Well, that sounded weird. Okay, let's get started. It's time for Pastor's Bible Study, and we are going to be in. I switched my Bible because Keith and I have been talking about something. Matthew chapter 27. We're going to start in verse 11. Does anybody want to give us maybe a little background summary of what we talked about last week? I think we didn't know. We haven't done Pilate yet. Yeah, you were right there on 11. Anybody want to give us a quick? Say that again. Yeah, Judas hung himself, and he also. Say that again. Yeah, he threw the silver back. We talked about that whole interaction of his own need for. I think Mike's translation said that he repented. Mine said that he was full of remorse, and he returned the 30 silver coins. So, that first section really focuses on Judas. Now as if, sometimes I like to see it as if you're watching a movie. It's like it fades away, it comes up to Judas, kind of deals with him, fade away now, and we're coming back to where Jesus is. Almost like we've re-entered the timeline here, and so now we'll start off in verse 11 there. So let's just pick up here in 27:11. We're going to read all the way through 26. Meanwhile, Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "Yes, it is as you say," Jesus replied. When he was accused by the chief priests and the elders, he gave no answer. Then Pilate asked him, "Don't you hear the testimony they are bringing against you?" But Jesus made no reply, not even to a single charge, to the great amazement of the governor. Now it was the governor's custom at the feast to release a prisoner chosen by the crowd. At that time they had a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. So when the crowd had gathered, Pilate asked them, "Which one do you want me to release to you? Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ?" For he knew it was out of envy that they had handed Jesus over to him. While Pilate was sitting on the judge's seat, his wife sent him this message: "Don't have anything to do with that innocent man, for I have suffered a great deal today in a dream because of him." But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and to have Jesus executed. "Which of the two do you want me to release to you?" asked the governor. "Barabbas," they answered. "What shall I do then with Jesus who is called Christ?" Pilate asked. They all said, "Crucify him." "Why? What crime has he committed?" asked Pilate. But they shouted all the louder, "Crucify him." When Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but that instead an uproar was starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. "I am innocent of this man's blood," he said. "It is your responsibility." All the people answered, "Let his blood be on us and on our children." Then he released Barabbas to them, but he had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. Okay, a lot of stuff there. Notice I have chosen not to put the microphones out there again tonight. That created too much confusion and too many people shy to say anything. So be loud. I do want to remind you, we are observing, we are not interpreting yet. So resist the temptation to start interpreting and move into the time of like, oh, this is being said, so obviously whatever. No, right now we're just observing. What is it that you guys are noticing in this text? No observations too small. Melanie? Okay, so Jesus actually responds when a question is asked of him. Why does that stand out to you, I guess? He hasn't been saying anything. In fact, there in verse 12, when he was accused by the chief priests and elders, he gave no answer. Okay, great observation. Greg?
But he doesn't say anything to the next question.
Correct. So now the next question's asked and he stays quiet. What we're observing here is he responds one time, and everything else he is staying quiet. Pleading the fifth. I don't think they had the fifth back then.
His response was,
So you say. Well, is that all yours says there in 11? Just so you say. Okay. I'm going to try to pull up the Greek here real quick. Mine says yes. It is as you say. You have said so. I would imagine the Greek is clearly something along that same line of not actually saying yes. So, okay, let's keep going. What are some other things you're noticing? Jesus Barabbas? They still would have said Jesus, yeah. Jesus Barabbas. Actually, okay, I'm just going to go into interpreting. Good observation. Barabbas has two names here in your version, and that's Jesus Barabbas. Okay, just put a little pin in that. What else are you guys noticing?
The governor was amazed at Jesus' silence.
Okay, the governor is amazed at Jesus' silence.
he had never seen that response before, that behavior before, and he didn't know that Jesus was carrying out his father's plan.
Are you reading a comment at the bottom? Okay, let's hold that for a minute. Okay, what else?
No one answers Pilate's question about why.
When he's asking back to the crowd. Yeah, nobody answers. They keep shouting. Yeah. Doesn't that help you picture it a little bit too? Though, if you can just kind of jump into that story, making that observation just helps set the scene a little bit, doesn't it? They're shouting. He asks a question back and no one responds. They just keep shouting. If you haven't witnessed that situation, maybe in an elementary school classroom or something, or we've been in situations, or at least watched situations like that on TV. What else are you guys noticing?
Pilate's wife don't have anything to do with him. Bad dream about him.
Yes. Pilate's wife comes into the picture, into the scene from nowhere, doesn't she? And she actually seems to almost slip a message to him, or she seems to be speaking to him, but she's like all of a sudden a new character and never to be mentioned again. It's interesting, just to take a note, in the Greek Bible that I have on my phone, at the end of verse 11, Jesus' response, he says the word "nigh," nu alpha iota, and that actually means yes. So that's interesting. I would want to do a little bit more research. It doesn't change a whole lot, except there is a little bit of a nuanced difference. If he just says "you say so," he's saying that's what you say. If he says yes, it's a little bit more declarative, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. What else? What else are you guys noticing? Abby? Yeah. Yeah, so great observation that we're now seeing this customary thing. Matthew's helping us to understand that this isn't just something that he's bringing up. He's actually dating it and connecting it to something here, and that is the feast. With a capital F, the feast. We can get into that here in a minute. I feel like another hand came up over this way. I might be missing. What else are you guys saying? Dylan?
They call Barabbas a notorious prisoner.
Yes. I was trying to see what mine, yeah, mine was notorious as well. Does everybody have that word? He's a notorious prisoner. I was thinking that was a Three Amigos joke, but I think Three Amigos is, no, not plethora, infamous. That's what, that was the Three Amigos joke. He must be infamous. Yeah. Yeah, great observation. He's a notorious prisoner. Tiffany? Yeah, Pilate's getting nowhere. But now let's go a little further in that observation. He's getting nowhere. What's the scene? What's the reason he's getting nowhere? Or what's around that, I guess? What's in that context? Yeah. He can see. But that word "but" is really important there. But instead, so it's setting it on. But instead, an uproar was starting. He's getting nowhere, but instead an uproar is starting. I want to put a pin in that because I want to talk about the idea of Roman peace, Pax Romana, what Roman peace actually is. Keith?
Well, I was going to say pretty much the same thing. It says that the chief priest persuaded the multitude.
Okay, so
You guys got to do this.
yeah, so chief priest is putting his hand in there saying, we've got to do something about that. He gets the crowd going. All right, what else? Other observations, Kate? What you're seeing here is the importance of interpretation. If it's just let him be crucified, that has its own nuance to it, doesn't it? If it is crucify him, one is much more aggressive, isn't it? The other is much more passive. This is why Bible translation can be a really important thing. It's why it can also be a very dangerous thing. This is not a dangerous situation so much, but this is why Bible translation is actually really, really important and is the subject of a lot of debate over time. Yeah. Melanie?
I always appreciate the clear mental picture you get when Pilate washes his hands and I wash my hands of this.
I wash my hands of this, yeah. And it's not even that he acted as if he washed his hands. He puts his hands, he actually washes them with water and says, I'm done. Very theatrical, Doreen, you're right. Don't miss what the response is from all of the people. I have this underlined and starred. Let his blood be on us and on our children. Okay, let's start there. Actually, we're going to end there. That's the biggest, that's a pin and a highlight. We have to come back to that. If we get towards the end, you say, oh, you forgot to go back to verse 25. Someone throw something at me, okay? That is huge. Pam? Oh, you mean before he has handed him over to be crucified? Okay, we'll start some interpretation here. It's a good moment to move into interpretation because it's already 5:30. Okay, so when I read that, Pam, I don't see him as handing him over to the Jews. The Jews were not the ones who crucified him. He's handing him over to the people who will take him to be crucified. The flogging happens in his courtyard, and the crucifixion happens on Golgotha, a ways away. So he's handing him over to the work of now being crucified, is the way I read it. His flogging is part of the prescription for those who are to be crucified and those who get the most serious punishment. It's the flogging. Now, there's a lot of legend and information from Roman history about what this would have been. Probably it's the most gruesome part in the Passion movie. I feel at one point there's a strike it, remove some skin, kind of thing. The reason, what's happening in this situation, from what I understand, is that there is a certain number of strikes that can be given to a person before it kills them. And that's the prescription for those who deserve the death penalty. And then they're moved off to the place of being crucified. Now the question is, why is it that he is so ready to hand him over to be crucified to the Jews? Why is it that he's swayed so easily? And go ahead, Rachel.
He sees that the people are getting worked up.
That's exactly right.
He doesn't want peace.
He sees that the people are beginning what in my Bible said was an uproar or a protest or a large gathering where big things happen. Now here's the key of understanding the idea of peace in Rome. Have you ever watched The Gladiator? They talk about this a little bit in the movie The Gladiator. Great movie, kind of gruesome too, but it's a great movie. One of the things about his conversation about peace, it's at the very beginning. And the idea is, you think peace is that you have created peace because you have conquered everyone. But really, that peace can only come by the blood of those you have conquered. You gained peace by hurting a lot of people. And that's a really great description of what Roman peace actually is. The way you keep peace is not by making things peaceful, but by keeping your thumb on the people. And the way you keep your thumb on the people is by force. And the only time you need force is when they begin to gather and suggest that they're going to somehow take over. So the Roman authorities would have always hated large gatherings. Paul gets into this situation I think it's in Philippi. Am I right? Philippi or Ephesus, where he is speaking and they're against him because I think it's Ephesus, because he's destroying their economy because he has called out the god of Artemis. And they gather around, they call a big crowd, and they want to pummel him. And they're not Jews, they're a bunch of Gentiles who want to take him out because he's ruining their economy. And the gathering itself is such an uproar that the Roman authorities are like, nope. And they put it to bed. This is what Roman peace is. And as Pilate begins to see this happening and an uproar is beginning to take place, his immediate response is, wash my hands of this, we're going to get rid of this, you can have him. Because sometimes it's better to make a political decision to get, to push this off, to say, yes, I'll do that for you now, because that is a political decision. I'd much rather have peace in this moment than have to deal with the chaos in the future. Mark? That's right, sure.
But he has a large number of soldiers. Putting this rebellion, this uproar down, I don't see that as something that troubles him a whole lot.
So don't get lost in the moment. Recognize that if you're going to put a rebellion down here, you've also now spent political capital for the future. There is a very fine-tuned peace that has been created between Israel, or the Jews, and the Romans. So actually, Keith sent me a text a couple of days ago from John 11 that had nothing to do with what we're talking about now, but it's the same situation. Jesus has just raised Lazarus from the dead. And it's not a commotion is happening, but a lot of people are following him because of that. And Caiaphas gets up in that moment and actually says, it is better for one man to die than for all of the children of God. But his fear is that the Romans will take away, he had two things, our place and our what? Authority. They will take away our place and our authority. This is the delicate eggshell balance that's between the Jews and the Romans in Jerusalem especially, but in the Roman world, that they're always walking on. And you think Rome has all the power, which they do, but it's not that they can just do whatever they want. So he is keeping in mind all of these little nuances, and in his mind, it's much better politically for him to give over this man Jesus, who he really doesn't know much about. Even though his wife said, don't do anything with him, he is choosing to ignore his wife for the sake of keeping his own political peace right there. That's a big thing. Yeah, Stephanie's bringing up the idea that maybe he is I think he's obviously living in some confusion. But look, what does an autocrat do in places of confusion? When you don't feel confident, what do they do? Force. That's what always happens with an autocrat. So if I'm going to default to anything, I'm just going to default to settling it right now, and I'm going to do it by force. And that is get rid of Jesus. Confusion, I think, comes when other Gospels give us a better picture of what happens with Pilate. There's more conversation. What is truth, he asked. He's investigating. He's really actually intrigued. Kind of like Felix in the book of Acts. I'm kind of interested in this. Teach me a little bit more. And his wife comes in and says, obviously something big is happening here. She's had a dream, enough to interfere with her husband's work. Not a big time thing that you do in patriarchal Rome. So something big is happening here, and yet the wheels of what's happening it's too much in motion. Here's what I want you guys. We got a little bit more time. Okay. Don't go over, this is a sort of minor, but don't lose your observations of the names that are given in some of these places, particularly with Pilate. See what he's called. Pilate and the governor. But he is called by Matthew the governor multiple times. To me, what that suggests is that Matthew is emphasizing his political role more than his own humanity as Pilate. You know what I'm saying? So it's not that he's saying Pilate as a person, yada, yada, yada. He's not going into the detail that other Gospels go into about the conversation and trying to figure out where is Pilate really on this thing. Matthew's more focused on his role, and that role is the one who executes judgment. I probably shouldn't have used the word execute. Gives judgment and then gives execution. That's Pilate's role here. Now, Jesus is given some names. What are his names? King of the Jews, Messiah, or the Christ. Yeah. In the Greek, the word is Christos, which is translated often Messiah. It's the word that's intended to be used for Messiah. Righteous man. Again, Matthew's trying to build a picture with the use of these names. Notice how Pilate keeps coming back to Jesus the Christ. Now, does that have anything to do with differentiating between Jesus Barabbas or Jesus the Christ? Possibly. I think it has less to do with Barabbas and more to do with think of how many times does Pilate refer to Jesus here? First, are you the king of the Jews? Then I think twice, maybe 3 times, Jesus the Christ. It's almost as if he's sort of made up his mind as to who he's at least supposed to be, and he keeps putting that in front of the Jews. You can imagine the Jews going, "Oh, quit using that name." You know? Is that what you were going to talk about, Mike? Yeah, you hear Mike saying just he feels like he's maybe needling the chief priest and even kind of maybe trying to get back. Hang on, Joreen had her hand and then I'll come to you, Nancy. It was about Christ. About using the word. Okay. Nancy? Okay, yes. Thank you for bringing that. That's right. He understands in verse 18. He knew it was out of envy that they handed Jesus over to him. It really kind of goes back to what Mike is saying. Did you use the word goading? Good word. He's really pushing them. All political, nuanced, relational stuff. Do you think Pilate obviously knows who Caiaphas is? He's dealt with him. They know each other. And they probably don't like each other at all. That's like, I'm not going to do it. Okay. Let's go to, so now let's just walk through. So Jesus has been brought before. Now we had the great privilege of standing in what they think is Pilate's courtyard. Every time, you just need to start bringing the pictures you have, Greg, and we'll just put them up on the... We had the privilege of standing in what they think is Pilate's courtyard. Now, I would tell you, it's not massive. Maybe y'all can help me. It's not even as big as this sanctuary, would you say? Maybe as big as like these rows here. It's not huge. So just imagine a crowd being pushed in on this, spilling out into the street where we walked out into the street, and you go from there. I mean, we walked the path, and you take a right, and you head up to where Golgotha is. And you can just imagine, I'm just picturing it after seeing it. They're crowded into this place. You know, when a place, even small, is packed with people, it feels more intense. We could have half of this sanctuary packed full of people, and it would feel much more intense than the whole sanctuary with just the same amount of people but spread out. It just feels different. So you can imagine Pilate's dealing with that. He's a little bit, I'm sure he's overwhelmed. You can imagine how loud it would have been. So there's a lot of confusion and a lot happening, and he's trying to yell and scream and ask them questions, and they're not responding, nor does it seem like they want to respond. Jesus himself has stopped responding. And now his wife comes in and says, "Don't have anything to do with this man." You can imagine the confusion, Stephanie, of what he's dealing with here. But his response is, "Okay, I'll give him to you." Now, we don't have any information on what Barabbas was really about. There is some thought that he was another leader of a revolt, or he was someone who was participated heavily in revolts in the past. But whatever it is, he's notorious. Mark? That's a great, yeah. You know, that's a great question. Were there no other prisoners? Is there no one else that we can talk to? That's from Monty Python and the Holy Grail, by the way. It's a great question. Why is there not someone who is a little bit less notorious that he could bring forward? And I think that you could probably come to the conclusion of a couple of things. They don't arrest many people. Okay, this is Rome. They probably have a lot more prisoners. So Barabbas must have some sort of political distinction that is helpful for Pilate. It could even be because this is the feast, and the tradition was that he would give someone back. It could be that he had already identified Barabbas as the one he would give back. That there's some sort of maneuvering that's happened in the background that led him to the point where this was already naturally at play. Regardless, he has no inclination to really, or even a reason to bring in Jesus, except for his own political safety. So he says, I wash my hands of this. And this is where I really want to get to the meat of the evening. What an ignorantly prophetic response by the people. They have no idea what they're saying. But on this side of history, isn't it amazing to hear? Let his blood be on us and on our children. Yes?
What did they say to persuade them to actually go to that
Of saying that.
after just a few days before the screaming?
They don't want to do the deed, so they bring him to Pilate. They're so angry and want him crucified that even at this point, they're even willing to give up the idea that the blood would be on Pilate's hands and not on his hands. Last week we discussed even. The silver coins come back into the temple. We can't take that and use that here because it's what? Blood money. They're trying to avoid that at all costs, and now they just say the one thing that Jesus says, now we can finally agree on something. The whole reason that this is happening is so that my blood would be on you and on your children. You just don't know why. Abby? Uh-huh. To the third and fourth generations, yeah. So beautiful. This is the poetry of Scripture. This is why we say all Scripture is God-breathed. This is why we talk about the fact that the Holy Spirit is really the author of the text. Now, Matthew is the author of this text, but he has to have been inspired by God. Was he listening to God and dictating what he was saying? I don't believe he was. I think that Matthew was full enough of the Spirit, which we will talk about next Sunday, Christian perfection. I think he was so led by the Spirit in the moments of writing this, he's telling us what God wants us to know. He's made the connection points himself, I'm sure. But what's happening here is that the people of God, the Jews themselves, are wanting to kill God, kill Jesus. And they're so much so saying it that they're like, fine, let his blood be on us and on our children. And Jesus, no doubt, if he heard it, I mean, at least the Father was up there going, you get the point, but you're missing it. It's adventures in missing the point. What a beautiful moment. They are prophesying their own redemption in the midst of something so unholy. Tell me that our God cannot redeem bad things. Tell me that our God cannot take, just like Joseph, what you intended for harm, I have intended for good. Our God is so much bigger than anything we could ever dream or expect. And this one little moment, he's going, yeah, you intend harm. And I'll make it something good. Rachel?
We have a lot
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I am so stunned by this statement when the Jews say that his blood be on our hands. It doesn't mention that the priests were inside of it to say that. It was in the heat of the moment. Emotion took over. What's the ultimate punishment for children to be punished because they believe that illness or whatever was because somebody had sinned? The irony is that despite of the fact
Yeah. So you guys can't hear Rachel. Too bad. I'm just kidding. She's talking about how important dreams would have been, dreams for the Jews and for the Romans. So you didn't really go here, but really just kind of bringing up the importance of what his wife would have experienced. But she's also just talking about the irony of the chief priests inciting them into this place of anger, to even get to the point where they're willing to put a curse on themselves and their own children. And yet, God himself still smiles on them, still sees this the moment of redemption. I think we'd call that grace. Absolutely. Yeah, Dylan?
My question is how would Matthew know that, like, Pilate's wife had that dream? Like, was that something that would have been made public since they thought it was an omen? Or, like, how would he have known that?
That's a great question that I will tell you I have no idea. But Dylan's asking how would he have known it? There's a lot of details in the scriptures that we get that anybody would say, how would you have known that? Like, let me give you a better example than this, because Matthew would have probably been around or very close. Luke's gospel always is so amazing to me, because Luke was not there, and we know he wasn't there, because his name is Luke, and he was not one of the 12. And we actually know later he was a physician that they picked up some, How would he have known all this stuff? I think that what's important is for us to, at this moment, begin to recognize our own biases as people who have grown up in the 20th, 21st centuries, where when people write and give answers and we can just quickly go to Google, we just expect that it's something that is informed. And we end up thinking, a lot of times when we read stuff that's really old, that they weren't as sophisticated back then. But really, almost all authors in ancient history did so much more research and is so much more plausible than what we do now. We write research papers based off of Wikipedia, and that's like building a house of cards. They go and interview person after person after person, and they make sure that all of their facts are together, because they know if they don't, it could be countered. And so Josephus is a great example of that. Have y'all ever heard of Josephus? He is a great Jewish historian. And he is a great example of this, going back and back and back, making sure all of his witnesses are credible. And I believe that especially the disciples who wrote all the gospel authors would have done a very similar thing. We tend to think, though, that they were just writing from their own perspective, from the standpoint of, I saw this and so I'm writing it. But most often, they're writing from their perspective as if I write a sentence and you write a sentence, trying to say the same, or trying to quote what Rachel was saying. We're going to say it in a little bit different ways, if that makes sense. Diane? Oral tradition would have been strong. It would have been stronger in the Old Testament. You do have a lot of written history in the Roman period, and a lot of that was brought in by Rome. The Greeks and Rome really bring in a lot of written history. Oral tradition is primarily, we see that mostly as happening in the Old Testament. So that in the Old Testament, the Torah and the history and the wisdom literature, I guess all of it, even the prophets, most of the prophets would not have even been written down until they were in exile. So 587, everything else was oral tradition passed down from generation to generation. Nancy? What's it called again? Help is here. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's no discount, but it's a great combination. A smart man doing a lot of research with the shaping and power of the Holy Spirit to guide him, then you get these wonderful places of truth. It's a spectacular thing. Okay. Uh-huh. No, because in verse 16 or 17, Pilate brings up Barabbas as a possibility. And then they begin to call for him. Yeah. Yeah, Stephanie? Sure. Sure. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, and this is not just like some normal event. So, I mean, think about like whenever we all have memories, from our different moments in our life where something big happened and we can recall every little detail because it was a big event and it's never going to happen again. And it's similar things here that just the disciples probably saw a lot of these. It's kind of amazing. It's time for us to close. I don't want us to. I want to leave off of verse 25. I just want to emphasize how beautiful this moment is, that the people who are wanting to kill Jesus are also proclaiming their own atonement. That they're calling for his blood to be upon them, thinking responsibility, but instead it's an act of grace. And this is how beautiful God is in our life. And I want us to leave with that recognition that even in the midst of all of this chaos, even in the midst of all of these people doing bad things, God is still in control, and he still has his grace forefront on his mind. And next, it gets rough. We start to see even more of how tough it is for Jesus. So, great conversation tonight. I want to invite you over to dinner. You may not normally head over. I'm just going to say goodbye to all of you online before I make this announcement. See y'all later. You may not normally come over for dinner.